Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Alex and Christian Kiebert. And today, we look at a duet movement from an early cantata by Bach, BWV 196, Der Herr, denket an uns. The Lord hath been mindful of us, he will bless us. He will bless the house of Israel, he will bless the house of Aaron. He will bless them that fear the Lord, both small and great. The Lord shall increase you more and more, you and your children. You are blessed of the Lord which made heaven and earth. Amen. And that's the entire text of this entire cantata, which is short, clocking in at less than 12 minutes long. We've taken a look at the first chorus before, which has a delightfully perfect permutation fugue in it. And today it's time to take a look at what is most likely the most well-known section of this delightful cantata, which is movement 4, a duet for tenor and bass. You would think that this text, the Lord blessing us, might have some sort of a grand statement, but it's just simply not the tone of this cantata. This cantata is understated, as we have just said on our last episode. Bach is an understated and restrained composer, and his ego is not a part of his music, and there is no real personal passion or anger. Everything is in service of the musicality or the text. This was most likely a wedding cantata for a friend of Bach, and he most likely wrote it, although we don't know for sure, around the period of 1707 or 1708 while he worked in Mühlhausen, which makes him 22 or 23 years old. And the modest forces are strings and continuo instruments with 3 soloists and 4 singers total, 4-part choir total. Can be done easily with just 4 singers. I'm preparing for a performance of this at my church where we will use it because of its text about blessing children on our day where we install new teachers at our school. So the cantata, the usefulness of this cantata lives on into the present. Which brings us to the text for this duet. The Lord shall increase you more and more, you and your children. The aria opens in almost a chaconne style. It's not really a chaconne. It's not really a piece of music that has a ground bass line that keeps repeating over and over again. It kind of seems like it will be, but it doesn't end up being that. But that flavor, that characteristic texture is there as we hear basically a dialogue between the 2 violins, an imitative pattern that begins with the second violin and is answered by the first. And then that formula is given to the voices. And then there is a delightful exchange of sections between the singers and the strings. Energy builds as we reach our text, mir und mir, more and more. companion video, the tenor Charles Daniels explains how his sense of a bar line, of a structural beat one of each measure, is kind of lost here. That idea, even though it's an older idea, is something that Bach was very fond of. This idea that you could destabilize things just a little bit. And what better time to do that than when you're saying more and more? And so the pattern of two people saying more and more can really be a sort of antiphonal stereo effect. More and more and more and more and more, and so on. And then it builds. And they, as you mentioned, it's this hemiola effect that's rhythmically unmoored. It's 3 beats per measure, right? So if you have and more and more and more, those are like groups of 2, syllables. And then it doesn't match. It really serves to paint that text of no longer are we just saying the previous poetry, now we are just saying and more and more and more, and it's not matching. Yeah. It's its own thing. It almost feels like the time signature changed to kind of squeeze more and more into it. Yeah. It's a little bit self-referential meta in a way. It's more and more is more music. A very literal text setting. Sometimes less is more. But here, more is more. Yeah. And then we come to You and Your Children, which is set more vertically and straightforwardly in the voices. And finally, there is this final section, which doesn't sound like recapitulation, like it doesn't sound like a return to the beginning material, but it is just the entire text laid out all at once, from measure 58 to measure 64. It's more like a conclusion, but not like a recapitulation. But it simply is the voices going through all the text in the shortest amount of time possible. The entire duet could have just been these 7 measures. That would have been ridiculously short, but it would have worked. But it would have been the text, and yet the duet is already pretty short, even as it is. He just stretches the text out because of the more and more business. But here, the more and more is not stretched much. We just hear the entire text all in one line of music. But there's a gorgeous dissonance on that strong beat there at measure 59. Do you see that? Yeah. You've got the continuo E on the bottom. We're in the key of C major. The continuo E is on the bottom. The instruments are playing a harmony of C. And there's very strong suspension, double suspension going on with a D and an F present in the tenor and the bass voices. And it's not the only time he does that on that segne thing. There's usually some, at least, accent there. Isn't there one other time in here where he's got a pretty good dissonance? Oh, there's one, it's in measure 12. I love that moment there. And 12? Yeah, in 12 it's it's a 7th between the bass and the tenor. Yeah. A dissonance of the 7th. That happens again at the end of each Der Herr segne euch phrase. There's another one at 25, but it's inverted, so it's a 2nd instead of a 7th. Oh, yeah. Between the tenor and the... Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Between the tenor and the bass voice. And then there's only a few seconds to go until the end, where we just have a little button on the end. One more Der Herr segne euch. But, notably, an interesting textural flourish happens at the end with the strings. So did you catch that, listener, what happened in the string instruments at the very end? One note at a time, moving down triadically in C major, completely beautiful, stable notes, but encompassing a range that is way too big for a single instrument to play. But easily fitting within the range of all the instruments if you let them pass it on to each other. So this is a compound linear thing that is split between all the 4 string instruments, which is a very unusual texture in Baroque music, but it is a special effect that he used here at the end. Violin 1's got 4 notes, and then violin 2's got 4 notes, and then viola has 2 notes, and then cello has 2 notes, and the last one is long, and it's at the end. And that's it. You could almost blink and miss this.
Yeah, you certainly don't notice it if you're just kind of listening passively.
If you're not thinking about it, the cleverness of it might elude you.
It's kind of like the Gotteszeit recorders in the Symphonia, where if you're just listening passively, it just sounds like a lovely ta-na-na-na-na-na. But what's really happening is a stereo effect. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like that, where it's subtle.
If you're having trouble hearing it, simply watch the video that we will link to in the episode description, because the camera shot that is occurring right here at this moment, you can see all 4 string players, and you can see the first violin pass it off to the second, pass it off, and so on, and that's visually apparent in this video.
It's so cool. It's modern. The actual technique of that is modern. I mean, You see composers like Penderecki, people that are known for atonal modern music, doing things like Berg. Alban Berg did this a lot. Or is it Webern? I get Berg and Webern kind of mixed up sometimes. I think Webern may be known for that.
Well, Schoenberg in the Bach transcriptions of things, he would do that a lot, where he was more free with his approach than just the standard thinking of this musical line needs to be assigned to one instrument.
Right.
He would think
he'd split them up.
This musical line like starts with a trombone and then switches to a bassoon, and then at the top it's just like a muted trumpet.
Is Webern the one that did the Ricercar 6? And he splits up the voices a lot in that, in the middle of musical lines.
Yeah, that is Webern orchestration.
And it's cool to look at the score here. A lot of times we've said on the podcast before, listener, that if you read along with the score, especially if you are adept at reading scores, it can be a little tricky when there's a lot of instruments on the page. But here it's just it looks awesome on the score. You can see the notes just pass off from violin 1 to violin 2 to viola to cello, and you just see them like falling down off the page.
You could just trace a diagonal line right across it.
Yep.
The contour is just so apparent. This kind of bold experimentation with the result being so strangely delightful is something that characterizes the early Bach. He does this kind of thing less and less in Leipzig. By then he has a formula. His pieces aren't this short anymore by then either.
It's because it's missing something critical. This cantata is missing something that all his later ones have.
Recits?
Yeah, there's no recitatives in this at all.
Yeah.
If this had like a couple of recitatives thrown in there, it'd be 16 minutes. It'd be a sort of normal, if short-ish, cantata length. As it is now, it's like 11 minutes long.
So if there's like a scale, like a spectrum, where on one extreme is hard German Buxtehude Lutheran Schütz cantata style, and then on the other extreme is like Vivaldi Italian opera. Then a cantata like Gotteszeit is all the way to the left, and his modern Leipzig stuff is almost all the way to the right.
Right.
But this is like just one space from the very left. Like it has one little thing about it that is a little Italian, and that is that soprano aria. Because it has a da capo sign. So you could tell even though he was 23 when he wrote this, he was already thinking like, I do like that Italian thing. And I do like the more operatic way that they write their soprano solos, so I'm going to dabble in that.
Yeah.
And it would become more of a routine compositional style for him as he got older. But I really cherish these earlier works because they're short and sweet, and you just kind of never know what's coming next.
And now, here is that ending moment from the tenor and bass duet, Der Herr, segne euch, from the cantata, Der Herr, denket an uns, BWV 196. If this glimpse into an early cantata by Bach has piqued your interest about other early works of Bach, you can find those and so many more works by Bach as recorded expertly on the website of the Netherlands Bach Society, whose musical examples we use on our podcast. See the link in the episode description for more. And if you want more of our podcast, and you have currently just been listening to the episodes that you've picked out without downloading them, you should know that you can download them. It's pretty easy to do on most podcast players, and you can even subscribe to A Moment of Bach, and then your device will download each new episode as we release them. Next week, we'll talk about a new release by the Netherlands Bach Society, BWV 8, the cantata Liebster Gott, wenn werd ich sterben. And listener, I encourage you to... What? Hey, what's that noise?
Is it that one?
Is there a bird outside? Yeah, listener, listen to the first movement, and I bet you'll know what we're going to talk. It's a pretty unique orchestrational choice that happens in that movement.
Let's just give it away. Get your cat out. Until next time, enjoy those moments.